Did Emotiva just create a full range speaker with the T3 Plus? That was literally the first question I asked myself when I sat down and I listened to these speakers and the bass dropped in a song. I was really impressed. The volume wasn't loud, but I could still feel just a little bit of bass in my chest, and I just was not expecting that. So I pulled out my phone and checked the specs. Per the specs from Emotiva, these will play down to 29 Hertz. So they are not truly full range because they don't go down to 20 Hertz. But again, you can actually feel just a little bit of bass even at moderate volume levels. So that's one of the things that I want to talk about in my review of these, the Emotiva Emotiva T3 Plus. But I want to give a shout out to Emotiva and tell them thank you, because not only did they send me these, they also sent me the T2 Plus, which I reviewed just a few years ago, but I asked them if I could get those as well because I wanted to compare them to these. So not only will I be reviewing these T3 Pluses, but I'll also be talking about how they compare to the T2 Plus and even my own Arendal Sound 1723 Monitor S speakers. That will include some audio samples of all of these speakers and how they sound in my room. So definitely stay tuned for that. But I'm Cody, the home theater hobbyist. Let's get to it. Editor Cody here. First of all, Happy New Year. Now, near the end of this video, I give you a short list of floor standing speakers that I would consider for a 2-channel setup for my own use. So just speakers that I like that kind of match my personal taste. Now, I wasn't explicitly clear about this, but the T3 Plus and T2 Plus are on that list. So I just wanted to say that. Also, thank you to everyone who has used links in the video descriptions to purchase gear, because not only does it support the channel in being able to buy cameras and lights and stuff like that, but it also tells manufacturers like Emotiva that you support the home theater hobbyist, and it actually makes it easier to get gear for review like the T3 Plus and the T2 Plus. So please use those links because it does make it a lot easier to get stuff like this, to do fun videos. So thank you for your support. Now let's move on and get back to the video. The Emotiva T3 Plus are the largest speakers in the Emotiva family from Emotiva. They stand just under 50 inches tall and each speaker weighs about 85 pounds. So these are not light or small speakers. They are actually quite big. I think they're probably the largest speakers that I have tested, physically largest speakers that I have tested in this room. But they have the Emotiva design, like the T0, the T1, the T2. They have that same vinyl cabinet out here and that same HDF construction, so it is solidly built. They also have the beveled edges here, and they have that same grill design that is magnetically attached. Now, behind this grill, if I pull it off, it's easy to pull off. You can see the magnets here, and there are magnets on the inside of the face, so you don't have to deal with any holes or anything like that in your case, right? But this cabinet houses a nice 3-way design. And what that means is there are speakers dedicated to the high, mid-range, and bass frequencies. The high frequencies, here's the tweeter right here. This is the folded ribbon tweeter from Emotiva. And then you've got 2 drivers here and here that handle the mid-range where a lot of vocals are. And then down here, you've got 3 8-inch woofers. So this is where all the bass that I was talking about comes from. And this is what makes this speaker so big. You've got so many drivers. The T2 Plus doesn't have as many, and I'll show that in just a minute. But they also have dual ports along the back of the speaker to allow air to exit and to give you better bass extension. And there are dual binding posts down there at the bottom to allow bi-amping and bi-wire if you so desire. But you can always just single amp these if that's all you want to do. Now, moving on to amplification, because that is a big deal with these speakers. These are forum speakers and they are 91 dB efficient, so they do require a little bit of power to drive them. Emotiva says that you need at least 100 watts of power into 4 ohm to adequately drive these speakers. Okay, at least 100 watts. You can do more, but at least 100 watts. Now, I couldn't quite test that in this room because I don't have an amplifier in here that's like 50 watts per channel into 4 ohms. My AV receiver, per the specs, can do up to 165 watts. But what I did do was I did connect these along with my Arendal Sound 1723S speakers, which are also 4 ohm speakers, and they're like 87 dB efficient in a 9-channel configuration. Well, my 2 overheads are Energy Take Classics. But anyways, I ran all 9 of those speakers, no subwoofer, with Kong versus Godzilla for about 45 minutes. And I can say that running those speakers as large or full range, that I was able to get sound out of these speakers. Now, I did compare my Denon AVR to my Monoprice Monolith 7-channel amplifier, which is a dedicated amplifier and can do up to 300 watts per channel into 4 ohms. And I have to say that my Denon didn't do as well as my Monoprice. So when I was watching that movie, what I noticed was that the bass response and just the overall response wasn't quite dynamic. It wasn't full and it wasn't as rich and detailed when I was running my Denon compared to the Monoprice Monolith. So these can definitely soak up power if you have a lot of these 4 ohm speakers, and make sure that you follow Emotiva's recommendation. You need to make sure whatever amplifier you use can put out at least 100 watts per channel across the entire frequency range at 4 ohms. Okay, I'm saying that because I only ran my test for like 45 minutes. I didn't run my AV receiver for hours and days testing these to see where it would break or anything like that, because to me that was kind of pointless. Okay, so just make sure that you have an amplifier that can do it. Emotiva has the XPA Generation 3 line of amplifiers that can also output enough power for these speakers as well. And like I said, I'll put links to those in the description below. All right, now let's talk sound quality. And as you can see, I've got the T3 Plus right here, but I've got its older, smaller brother right next to it, the T2 Plus. And as you can see, the design language is similar. You have folded ribbon tweeters between the two. You've also got mid-range drivers between the two, and you have 8-inch woofers between the two. The T3 Plus adds an additional mid-range woofer up here and an additional bass driver down there. There's also an additional port on the back. Okay, those are the main physical differences between these two speakers. They both have dual binding posts and basically everything that you see here, same vinyl cabinet. All of that's basically the same. I guess this one's a little bit bigger, but all of that is basically the same. So I am going to be comparing these two as I talk about sound quality. But I'm also going to be talking about my Arendal Sound 1723 Monitor S. Now right here, I've got the Center S from that line. This is the Arendal Sound 1723 Center S. But the Monitor S and the Center S are basically the same speakers as far as I can tell. One is vertical, the other is horizontal. The Center is obviously horizontal. So if you were to stand this up, move this emblem to this location right here, you got the Monitor S. So I decided not to set it up here with the rest of these speakers because this is basically the Monitor S. But again, I will be talking about all of these speakers kind of a little bit interchangeably a little bit as I compare them to the T3 Plus. Now, the first thing I want to talk about with sound quality is the tweeter performance. The folded ribbon tweeter between these two speakers. I like it. It gives you a nice detailed, clean sound with both of these speakers. There's not any harshness. It's just a really good tweeter performance. A lot of you like folded ribbon tweeters, and honestly, I can see why, because these do a great job giving you those levels of detail without any extra harshness from the sound. So I really like the tweeter design of both of these speakers. And both of them basically sound identical in the tweeter performance. But there is a difference between these two speakers at the crossover between the high end with the tweeter and the mid-range drivers. Now, the T2 Plus has a crossover set at 3200 Hertz, and the T3 Plus, the crossover set at 2800 Hertz. So what that means is that the tweeter covers just a bit more frequency range with the T3 Plus compared to the T2 Plus. Now, why they did that, I don't know, but I did actually notice it when I was listening to these two speakers back to back, because what I noticed was that the T3 Plus sounds just a bit more airy than the T2 Plus, just a bit more. There's just a bit more tweeter there because it covers a wider range than the T2 Plus. Now, does that change anything? No, not really, but I did notice it. Now, you're probably going to hear that crossover difference in the audio samples that you're going to listen to in a few minutes, especially when compared to the 1723 Monitor S. The T2 Plus is probably going to sound just a touch warm, and the T3 Plus is probably going to sound just a touch bright. Okay, so I just want you to be prepared for that. I think that is really just due to how they set the crossover differences. Now, moving into the mid-range, one of the things that I really like about the T2 Plus, and I still hear it now, is the mid-range. It is smooth, it is rich, it is full, it is natural. I really like the way voices sound, where, you listen to live concerts, listen to movies. I just like the mid-range performance of the T2 Plus. And that is continued with the T3 Plus. This is the same mid-range. It's just a little bit more prominent because you have the additional driver, but it has that same smoothness, that same richness, and like I said, that's really what I like about this line, is that mid-range performance. I think Emotiva really kind of nailed the mid-range performance with these speakers. Now moving into the bass department, again, same drivers. There's just an additional driver on the T3 Plus, and it has an additional port. And I think those two differences are actually what gives you that greater bass extension. So you're able to feel the bass more with the T3 Plus as compared to the T2 Plus. Both of them sound good, but the T3 Plus just plays a bit lower and gives you just a bit more bass feel. Okay, that's what I noticed when I sat down and listened to music and a bass note drops. It is just more impactful with the T3 Plus as compared to the T2 Plus. If you're playing, let's say, a 60 hertz tone, an 80 hertz tone, or whatever, they're both giving you that same fullness, that same richness, that same detail. It's just once you get, below 30 hertz, once you get to 30 hertz, I should say, the T3 Plus is just giving you a bit more. Now, listening to music on both of these speakers is just fun and enjoyable. I have to say, I listen to classical, I listen to gospel, I listen to a little bit of funk, a little bit of jazz, all of these different types, world music, all of these different types of music. And I just found myself just tapping my toes. They do a great job with stereo image, left and right, and just locking things into the center. And what I found was this: if I have these towed in just a little bit towards my main sitting position, I get a nice center lock. Voices sound like they're coming right from the center of the screen if you've got a television going and you're just watching TV, and there is a lot of height to the image. I did try No Time to Die, the bell scene that I talk about a lot, where James Bond is coming in to the square and he's kind of surrounded by all the bad guys, and there's some church bells playing overhead, and these give you a good bit of height to the image. It's not like Dolby Atmos, but both of them do a good job giving you height to that image. So those are my overarching overall thoughts between these two speakers. They are very similar. The main differences are the crossover setting between the tweeter and the mid-range, and also the T3 Plus gives you that additional bass extension. But I really kind of wanted to dig into that bass extension a bit, because that was really what I think separates these two speakers. And the first thing I did was I tried this with a subwoofer, the Arendal Sound 1723S2V and the Subwoofers VTF-2, both my subwoofers that I have here. And I have to say that if you're going to use a subwoofer, pretty much any subwoofer, and have any crossover setting above, let's say, 40 hertz, you should probably just go with the T2 Plus, to be honest with you, because any crossover setting, they pretty much do the same thing. Go with the T2 Plus, okay? If you're going to go with a go with a subwoofer. But if you are going to go without a subwoofer, that's where things get interesting, in my personal opinion, because this does play lower, but lower doesn't always necessarily mean better, okay? Let me just say that. Because one of the bass heavy movies that I have here is Godzilla vs. Kong. There is a lot of bass, a lot of low frequency extension in that movie, a ton of it. So I tried that movie with these speakers, and specifically in chapter 5, where Godzilla and Kong meet for the first time in the ocean scene, there's a ton of bass all over. There's bombs exploding, they're roaring, stomping, there's just a lot of bass. And what I found was that the T3 Plus did overwhelm, the bass in the T3 Plus did overwhelm the mid-range and the tweeter just a little bit. It was just a little bit too much bass. Whereas I found that the T2 Plus had just the right amount of balance between the bass, the mid-range, and the tweeter performance. Okay, just that, no subwoofer, just these two speakers. That's what I found. Now, one of the things I did was I grabbed the port plugs from my Subwoofers VTF-2, and I put these plugs inside the T3 Plus port. I just had 2 of these, so I just one per speaker. And these actually don't fit. The ports are just a little bit bigger than these, but they fit just well enough to kind of put them in there. And I found that did clean up the bass, and actually it brought the extension more towards what the T2 Plus was able to do, and I found it to be a much more enjoyable experience. So one thing I wish that Emotiva actually put at least a set of port plugs inside the T3 Plus box. That way you could kind of mess around with the bass extension however you want. Because honestly, the way this is configured right now, you don't have any real control. So for scenes like that, you're going to have just a little bit more bass heavy performance. And honestly, it kind of makes the case for having a subwoofer even with this speaker, because you can change the crossover setting. You can change the volume setting. And with some newer subwoofers, you can have an app and kind of change the slope and the attack of the bass if you want. So there's a lot you can do with a lot of different subwoofers, and you have more control than you have over the T3 Plus. So from a bass standpoint, I think overall, I like the T2 Plus just a little bit more because I know it's going to give me a balanced sound compared to the T3 Plus. I think the T3 Plus does a great job. Don't get me wrong, especially when listening to music and stuff like that. But if you have a lot of bass and you are not just a super bass head, okay, a lot of bass like Godzilla versus Kong, these drivers, this bass extension could overwhelm just a little bit, especially if you don't have port plugs. So that is what I found with my just sort of testing these and really testing out, the bass performance of these two speakers. Now let's move on. Let's play a few audio samples so you can hear how these compare along with my Arendal Sound 1723S.
Like two magnets, we are drawn to each other. You just know how to push all my buttons. Moved out of town and I erased your number. Like two magnets, we are drawn to each other. You just know how to push all my buttons. Moved out of town and I erased your number. Like two magnets, we are drawn to each other. You just know how to push all my buttons. Moved out of town and I erased your number.
Hopefully you enjoyed those audio samples. Now I want to give you my thoughts on how these compare to the Arendal Sound 1723 Monitor S. Now, you heard that particular speaker in those audio samples, so you probably already have some of your own opinions, but I'll give you my thoughts sitting here in the room. And I want to start with the bass performance. Now, both of these speakers play deeper. They have more depth than the 1723 Monitor S. These have 8-inch drivers that has dual 6.5-inch drivers. So that's the main difference there. But the Monitor S does come with port plugs. So you can plug them and they give you, tighter bass. So if you're looking for music, that's probably the way I would go. Or if you're looking for depth, I'd probably go for these. Now, as far as the mid-range is concerned, I really like the mid-range performance of both of these speakers. This 3-way design, I think it just works really well. I like the mid-range from the 1723S Monitor, but I prefer these. Now, when you're listening to those audio samples, you probably thought that the T2 Plus sounded just a touch warm and the T3 Plus sounds just a touch bright. And I think that has everything to do with where the tweeter and mid-range is crossed over between these speakers and even the 1723S. I think that the 1723S is the most neutral sounding speaker speaker I've heard here, and these are very, very close to those, just to give you my thoughts. But there is a little bit of difference there. Now, as far as the tweeter, the high-end is concerned, I like this folding ribbon design. Like I said earlier, it gives you a clean, clear, detailed sound without any harshness. But I also think that's the case for the waveguide design of the 1723 line as well. And I have to give that a little bit of a nod because I think it's a little bit cleaner, high-end, a little bit more refined. I like that a little bit more. And I think it kind of has to do with the cabinet as well. I think the cabinet's a little bit quieter than these. Although they're both HDF, I think that's just a little bit quieter cabinet on that 1723 line. And that leads it to be just a little bit more dynamic and a little bit low distortion. So I just think there's just a little bit more there as far as being quiet and stuff like that. So those are my thoughts on this setup. Now, one of the questions I got in my unboxing video was, would I choose these or my current 1723S lineup? And I have to say, me personally, I would choose my Arendal Sound 1723S lineup. I did a whole video on that, and I'll put a card up above, a link in the card up above, or in the description below, so you can check out that video. But one of the reasons why I chose those speakers is because the monitor that I have in the center channel, as far as I can tell, they are the same speaker, same cabinet volume, same drivers, everything's the same. So what that means for me in this room, and I think for anybody really, is that when you're listening to them and they are set up properly, and something pans from left to center to right, it is a seamless experience because it's basically the same speaker, right? That's one of the main reasons why I chose those speakers. And I can't really get that with this lineup. Yes, I could buy the C2 Plus or the C3 Plus as a monitor, but it's still not the same cabinet volume as either one of these. I'd have to buy another one of these and lay it down or something like that to get that same sort of seamlessness that I'm looking for, right? So that's why I would choose it for my setup. This is a multi-channel setup. Now, that leads to the next question. Well, if you were only going for a 2-channel setup, would you choose these or the Arendal Sound 1723 Monitor S? Great question. I would probably choose the T2 Plus, or excuse the T3 Plus, if I was going only for, a 2-channel setup. But if I was going to have a subwoofer, I'd go for the T2 Plus. In my personal opinion, I really like this with a subwoofer. I think it sounds really good. So that's just me personally. Now, honestly, that's not a truly fair comparison because the Monitor S is a monitor speaker. It's not a full tower speaker, so it doesn't have the same cabinet volume. To really have a fair comparison, you'd have to look at the Arendal Sound 1723S Tower, which has 8-inch drivers. It may have 3 or 4 8-inch drivers in there. That would be more comparable to these. I haven't heard that speaker, so I can't say how it sounds, but that would be more of a fair comparison in a 2-channel tower setup to these speakers. So like I said, I would give the nod to these, but I really haven't heard the real competitor from Arendal Sound for these speakers. So that's sort of what I think, okay? My personal opinion. Now, as far as other tower speakers that I like, not talking about other speakers, but tower speakers that I like that I've heard in this room that I would consider with these. I would give a quick thought to the Q Acoustics Concept 50s. I just reviewed those a few weeks ago. I really like those. They have a lot of depth to the image. They work really well with movies and music, so I like those a lot. Also, the Concept 500s are very nice. Heard those in this room, reviewed them, but those are much more expensive. I think they're $6,000 or $7,000 for the pair, so they're much more expensive than these, but I do like those. Also, the JBL HDI 3600s. I reviewed those a few months ago. I really like those as well. Those are a little bit bright, but they're refined, they're tight. I like those a lot. More comparable to these would be the 3800 because that has 8-inch drivers as well. So that'd be a little bit more comparable, but I like those as well. Also, a pair of speakers that I like that I reviewed a while ago were the Definitive Technology BP9000 series. And I want to say that the tower speaker in that one was maybe the 9060, if I'm remembering that correctly. But I did like those speakers. Those were more full range. They had a dedicated subwoofer at the bottom with an amp built in, so you could really kind of just do just those and no subwoofer, which is kind of nice. But I do have a little bit of hesitation with those because I think in the comment section, I've seen a few people just kind of complain a little bit about having problems with the amplifiers over time. Now, I didn't get to long-term test those. I had to send those back there for review. So that gives me just a little bit of hesitation. So I don't know if I really would go with those, but those are just some speakers that I really like. And there are other speakers that I like that I've heard in this room. I like the Heiko Auroras I listened to. I also like the Arendal Sound 1961s. Those are a little bit smaller, not as quite as dynamic as my monitresses and stuff like that, but I did like them. Now, some of you may be asking about, let's say, the Polk Reserves. I haven't heard those, so I can't really say how they would sound. Also, the Klipsch R73s, I think, are the latest version of those. I haven't heard those in this room. I've heard a little bit of those for a few minutes, and I was like, that sounds pretty good, but I haven't heard them in this room, so I can't really say if I would choose those. But those are just some speakers that would be on my list. I'm not saying they should be on your list, but those would be some floor standing, 2-channel setup speakers that I would think about on my list. So hopefully that gave you some insight. I don't know what you're going to do with that, but hopefully that gave you some insight. But overall, I do like the T3 Plus. I think these are great speakers, especially if you just want to go with a pair of speakers, no subwoofer, and you just want to have a good experience listening to music, you know, tapping your toes with different types of music, or just a really nice movie experience, because these do play deep, right? Now, if you're going to go with the subwoofer, I'd say just go with the T2 Plus and get a subwoofer, and get 2 subwoofers specifically so you can have better balanced bass throughout your setup. I actually did a video on that. But honestly, if you want to purchase these or anything else from Emotiva, use those links in the description below, because it does tell Emotiva that you support the home theater hobbies and that you want to see more videos like these. So thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. We'll talk to you next time.